you were talking about post-COVID, right? And I'm going to read the question that I penned out here. So you were talking about, I think maybe perhaps it's an advice that says renewing and reclaiming what has been lost in creative sectors. So the question is, going by the works of the 2005 convention or the picture of the 2005 convention, which you have just spoken about, what are some of the specific developmental programs that you may prefer to the creative community, supposedly the lesser privileged ones? You know.
Thanks for that. I mean, I think I
Mm,
did say in my presentation
mm,
that I thought a key priority
mm,
really must be,
mm,
well, apart from the fact that government has an obligation to really ensure coverage of its relief program to
mm,
all cultural creatives, practitioners, freelancers across the value chain,
mm,
because they've been hit the absolute hardest of most people, given that they're informal, given that they work for themselves, their own account workers. Therefore, their ability to access relief has been so constrained, which brings me to why I feel that the most productive way forward is to really think carefully about expanding with the Department of Labor the social and economic rights of all cultural creative workers to ensure that there's decent work, there's fair remuneration, there's social protection, that freelancers are included in the definition of employee so they can access maternity benefits, unemployment insurance, and the like, that there's a real recognition of collective bargaining or unionization so that there's a group of people that can actually speak on behalf of each other, given that people are so individualized in the sector, and that we take seriously the informality of our sector. It's not going to go away. People are informally organized and informally working because they have agility when they do that. They have much more sort of innovation in the work that they do. They don't want to spend the cost of compliance. So for me, the working through intermediaries, government needs to accept that intermediaries can do that work,
Okay.
and they can still procure from the informally cultural workers and informal creative workers, so that those workers don't miss out on what is a very important part of our audience, which is government. So that's where I would put the priority, establishing the socio-economic rights of all creatives across the value chains.
You know what? This conversation can actually go on and on and on, but I want to ask you one crucial question, and this question, I'm going to direct it to you advising the very people that you've just spoken about right now. So now my question is that during the COVID, most of the artists, the creatives, even till now, most of them, let me say 90% of them, they are saying that the grant that was, uh, announced by the government never get to them. All right. Then on the other hand, the government is coming back to say, no, your papers are not okay. That is why we didn't give you the grant. You understand what I'm saying? So I just wanted to stand in the middle to solve this
Yeah.
riddle, this fight between the government and the creative people.
Well, I mean, that's not really the job of UNESCO, but I think what the UNESCO 2005 convention gives artists, creatives, federations, representative bodies the right to do is invoke the convention to say, you have ratified it as government, now implement it. One of the key things in that convention is taking seriously the role of civil society and working with civil society to implement and monitor what's happening in the culture and creative sector. Also invoke the 2005 convention to say, preferential treatment must happen.
Okay.
Artists must be able to showcase their work internationally. Visa applications must be simplified.
Okay.
The government has a role to play in that. So there's not everything that can be sorted by government alone, but the 2005 convention gives everybody, all creatives, all artists, all organized federations, the right to say, you've ratified this convention, help us make it work, and make sure that you can make it work.
Okay, thank you very much for that one. This is the final place. Sorry. you know, it's always crazy like when you having a conversation that's dear to your heart and you have the right person to have that conversation with. So this last question is going to be, I just want you to, to help also speak to the government now, finally, because you've spoken to the artists now. What, how can they make this access to funding, all right? Like I just said, I know you're not a government person, but just from an advice point of view as a third party, how can this government make this access to funding more accessible so that these artists, the creative whom they make these funds available for, can access them?
Okay, so firstly, I think it's important to say I do a lot of work on the continent. South
Okay.
Africa, unusually on the continent, has a lot of money for arts and culture.
Okay.
However, this problem, or not a problem, this fact of informality and the way in which government funds get dispersed and have to get uh, uh, checked, and the checks and balances for them mean that many artists, because they work informally, cannot show, for example, during COVID, that they had a cancelled contract because they don't work with contracts. They work on word of mouth. There's trust in the sector between artists and live venues, and if I'm talking about live music, for example. So that obligation from government to ask for those documents was a false question. They should know better, to be honest. They should know better how the sector is organized. So it's really recognizing how is the sector organized, how does the sector work, but also to make sure that those funds are not only located in government departments, but they are that every provincial government has a fund for arts and culture, a substantial fund, because otherwise how on earth do you reach all 9 provinces adequately? And then it's really, I want to go back again and say that the only way we keep government doing the job that it's meant to do well is by holding them accountable. If they say there's COVID relief money and people are not getting that money, they have to account for why not. And if it means that we have to go to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee and raise it with them to say, please, can you find out, exactly where that money went, who got that money, why do we all feel that it didn't land up in the right place at the right time? That is an accountability issue, and we have organizations and mechanisms to do that. We need to use them much more. And I think that's what the UNESCO 2005 Convention gives us. It gives us a system of governance to ensure that people do what they are told, what they are meant to do. That the 2005 Convention, having ratified it, gives a lot of obligation onto government as to how to support the culture and creative sector.
It can be said any way better than that. No, any further than that. Any further than this, I'll be over exaggerating and actually destroy the whole beautiful interview. I want to thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Christopher.
I
It
want
was
to thank
good
you
to be here.
I want to use this opportunity also to invite you straight up to my personal podcast. I have a podcast called The Christopher Audley's Notebook.
Okay.
It's streaming on my radio. That's radio.morges.com. So the Christopher Audley's Notebook is all about talking about this very same things that you're talking about now, how to develop the young artist, how to enlighten them, provide information, this type of
Very close to my
information.
heart. That's why I lecture.
So you are the kind of person that I actually need to talk to on Christopher Audley's Notebook so that we can share some of these ideas about the music business and how
And
to
there are
go about
many
things.
others who are fantastic in the sector. If I can just say a big shout out to my colleagues Gwen Ansel, Andre Leroux, the South African Cultural Observatory that has written a fortune about this, and there's lots of research out there
Okay.
for South Africans that have very clear recommendations,
Okay.
all of which have to be compiled and go back to government to say we need to implement.
Thank you very much. On that note,
Thanks,
is there anything you want to add from your to conclude this?
No,
Is there
just
anything
just to
from
say
your-
that it's been a very tough 2 years, and I think people feel very hard hit and have been very hard hit by what COVID has done to the sectors, decimated many parts of our sector. It doesn't mean that our sector was in good shape before COVID. So we've got a lot of work to do to repair what happened and the damage during COVID, but we already were we weren't in a good space. And the relationship between civil society, the government has to be repaired, because it's a partnership. This is not only government that implements, who is doing the creative work, but artists and creatives. And so, and I think we need to raise the status of that work in our society. So another shout out to people like you to raise awareness about the sector, about the cultural expressions that are in our sector, because without that, without broadcasters coming on board, private or public, the sector feels very alone.
Thank you very much. On that note.
This is Avril Jaffe signing off on Margie's TV, radio and magazine.